Yeah, hi, I'm Samuli Kangaslampi. I'm a psychologist. I'm a university lecturer over at Tampere University in Finland. And I'm a senior researcher as well, University of Turku, so in this same city, but the Finnish-speaking university, as this is the Swedish-speaking one. And I was also a postdoctoral researcher at Maastricht University for a couple of years where a lot of this work took place. And I'll be talking about autobiographical memory recall under psychedelics. So in other words, what is it like and what happens and what are some interesting issues related to people remembering events of their lives under psychedelics. If you go back and you read the very first papers on LSD, it's very, very striking how much this thing is featured. Like one of the major effects, like the first effect of these drugs that was reported often was that they give people these intense memory experiences. So this is the very first English language paper on the therapeutic use of LSD. And in that paper, Anthony Bush and Warren Johnson wrote that the effect disturbed the barrier of repression and permitted a re-examination of significant experiences of the past, which sometimes were relived with frightening realism. So this was like one of the main effects of LSD in this very first paper. A little bit later, Arthur Chandler, Mortimer Hartman wrote, based on quite a lot of patients, that it is very common for early childhood memories that have been repressed or forgotten to emerge, usually with great clarity of recall. Reliving describes the more intense experiences better than the term recall. And this is repeated over and over again in the early papers, and it goes beyond just saying that, yeah, people remember their past. Sandison and Whitelaw write that LSD is the only drug which will bring this particular type of repressed memory into consciousness, and they're talking about childhood sexual abuse. So they were very, very convinced that this is the only way to uncover repressed memories based on their clinical work in the UK. Then there were some of the more outlandish claims. Many of you may be familiar with LSD researcher Stanislav Grof, but he was not the only one saying that people remember their birth. So the founder of clinical theology, Frank Lake, got into LSD, and he notes that week after week, patients would return for this abreactive remembering of the first year of life. Abreaction is a psychoanalytic term for when you not just remember something, but you get the repressed emotion as well, and you work through that emotion, and then it helps you. What I was not prepared for was the frequent abreaction of birth trauma. A number of cases emerged in which the reliving of specific birth injuries were so vivid, so unmistakable in their origin, and afterwards confirmed by the mother or other reliable information that my skepticism was shaken. So a few people even say, yeah, people had memories of their birth, and we confirmed, some details. I'm very, very skeptical. But just to point out how much this issue was discussed, in the 50s and 60s. Okay. Comparatively, there's been much less focus on memory-like experiences in this more recent wave of research, much more focus on mystical type experience and transformative experiences, transcendent experiences. But there's some mentions here and there. For example, with patients in a psilocybin trial, some of the most powerful experiences were moments when past traumas were apparently revisited. Drug experiences often interspersed with memories of love as well as trauma, so both positive and negative memories. In a study of people taking ayahuasca during their grief process, some participants referred to having re-experienced biographical memories. Some of them refer to re-experiencing death-related events, but others to long-forgotten events involving the deceased or reviewing their personal history, arriving at new meanings for their own life history. So we see a little bit of reports like this, but not a lot of focus on the autobiographical experiences or the memory effects of psychedelics more generally. We did a study about the first experiences with psychedelics of Finnish people a few years back, and we haven't published on these qualitative accounts, but just picking up from there, we did see, even Finnish people taking psychedelics for the very first time. Reported things like, I saw terrible scenes from my childhood that until then were shrouded in darkness, or I did not remember them. Another said that I was able to scroll through my memories from different types of menus with a kind of 3D operating system. But noting how little research there is on this, and what little we know about memory, we are, together with Morten Leeds, right here, wrote this review/commentary earlier this year, pointing out 6 open questions about things that we do not know about psychedelics and autobiographical memory, and that we should know. And I will look into each of these 6 questions a little bit for the remainder of this talk, but I don't just want to ask the questions, I do want to provide at least a little bit of some kind of answers, so I'll also be noting some findings from this study. So this is a study we ran together with Kim Köpers of Maastricht University, called the AutoPsy or Autopsy study, if you prefer, autobiographical memory and psychedelics. So this is an observational survey study, but a longitudinal one on memory experiences. And so we recruited people before they took a psychedelic, who were planning to take a psychedelic, whatever the context. and then they answered questions before and immediately after, a day or two after, and then a month after. Not a huge data set here, but something that we can still look at. So these were about 1/3 women, mean age 35, from many countries, English-speaking adults, but from many countries, Finland, Netherlands, Germany, and others, fairly well educated. A few were first-time psychedelic users, but generally they had previous experiences. About half of them took psilocybin, about a third LSD or LSD analogs, also very popular these days, and ayahuasca was the third most common drug. Typically large or moderate doses in very different circumstances, most commonly alone, but also often with some friends and different intentions and contexts. Okay, so the first question we posed with Morten is, do psychedelics enhance our autobiographical recall? This was a thing that was said over and over and over again in the early papers. Like they give access to memories that are otherwise inaccessible. That's one way of enhancing memory, or they cause very, very vivid and real experiences that are like reliving. In many of the papers, they describe like the person didn't just remember a childhood memory; they became a child. Like there was age regression. Like they were like acting like a child and with the child's emotions and everything. So two types of enhancing possible. Previous research, as Morten pointed out, psychedelics tend to dose-dependently impair performance in all kinds of cognitive tasks, and this includes typical memory tasks like learning a list of words or something like that. And there's, partial and even total amnesia for memories and identity under psychedelics. People sometimes don't remember anything about their lives when they're under psychedelics. This kind of goes against this idea that there will be enhancement of memory. On the other hand, we do have a little bit of evidence that psilocybin increases the subjective intensity of memory. So in one study, people thought about positive autobiographical memories, and they reported increased vividness, increased emotional intensity, and also the brain imaging showed like increased activity in areas related to this sort of intense subjective experience. We looked at this a couple of ways. In our study, this is a very simple question. Did you find it easier or more difficult than usual to access memories? The variety of responses is very, very high. That's the main answer. Some found it much more difficult, some found it easier, but on average, especially towards the end of the experience, people do find it a little bit easier to access memories of their lives. Not so much during the peak. 8% reported total amnesia at some point, and 16% difficulties at some point. So some people do have difficulties remembering the past as well. And really, like, there's huge variety in how much memory is featured in the experiences in general, but almost all participants recall at least some memories for some part of their trip. Here's a few examples. Memories came to my mind much more easily than normal, and I also understood how to handle them. I had a heightened ability to recall events, but could not do so manually. My memory wasn't significantly affected. I felt I was completely disattached from myself, therefore I didn't have any memories connected to my personal life. The somatic reaction from my body to negative memory is much stronger than usual. I could visualize the event or experience and connect to how it affects me emotionally. The second question we posed, the claim in these early papers was not just that people recall their lives, but also that that's key to the therapeutic effects of psychedelics. So we asked, is this recall and processing of significant memories, especially traumatic memories, for example, is that a common part of psychedelic experience to begin with? Do people really recall like significant memories, traumatic memories specifically? Overall, we asked like how much of your experience did you spend recalling past events? We saw about 25% on average. Of course, this is quite a difficult thing to estimate, but you can ask people and they'll come up with an answer. And as we can see here as well, more towards the peak and the end of the experience. So most of the time, people are not thinking about their past, but for a significant part, maybe they are. But what types of memories? That was maybe a bigger interest here. We asked about many, many different types of memories. Some of them are listed here. And sort of most interesting for this idea of that people remember traumatic memories, we asked them before they took the drug about different adverse life events they may have had, so potentially traumatic events, and then we came back to see which of these did you recall under the psychedelics. And 44% of people recalled at least some of the adverse life events, so at least one potentially traumatic event, and 14%, so a third of those, so strongly as if to be reliving that experience. Also relevant maybe is that almost 40% recalled memories that they usually avoid. Could also be trauma, but could be something else, of course. Some examples. I recalled a painful memory on purpose, probably the biggest trauma of my life. I recalled the moment a horse I was very close to died. I wept like I have never before in my life. the onset of the peak, I was flooded with very recent memories showing me how much love there is around me. So a very different type of memory experience. And I kept trying to go back into my memory so that I could address the trauma. But I had absolutely no interest in doing so. The shimmering walls and reverberating beats were just too fascinating to be able to focus on anything else. So maybe something similar that Morten touched on a little bit with cognitive tasks. Okay, a very big question is, do psychedelics promote the development of false or inaccurate memories? So if you have these memories of your past and early childhood events and so on, are they real? Are they true? Did these things actually happen to you? Or, is there the risk of false memories? Something that I've been very interested in recently, and it's gotten quite a bit of attention as well. So we know that some other psychoactive drugs can increase susceptibility to false memories. There's quite good evidence for cannabis. If you're under the influence of cannabis and you see a crime, for example, you're more likely to have false memories of the details of that crime. A little bit of evidence also for MDMA. We know that psychedelics can enhance things like suggestibility, sense of salience, significance, familiarity, certainty of knowing. These would kind of suggest that whatever happens on the psychedelics would feel more real, whether it is or not. So maybe they could. Recently, clinicians have pointed out concerns about patients who recall traumatic memories under psychedelics, and then afterwards they're not sure if it was true or not. A lot of the time we can say, it doesn't matter if the memory is true or not, if it's useful, if it's therapeutic. But if you remember, your uncle abusing you as a child, then it makes a pretty huge difference whether that memory is true or not. There's only been one single small study about psychedelics where they affect false memories. Ayahuasca was shown not to affect false memories, but this was in very, very experienced users like Santo Daime, people who had like 500 experience of ayahuasca. So maybe it doesn't generalize. Very recently, in the last few months, this question has become even more acute because of a few publications. This publication presents case reports of people who took part in a psilocybin trial and apparently recovered memories that they had never remembered before of traumatic events. There was another preprint paper looking at these sort of experiences more widely, and it seems like for some people they were therapeutic, but for others they were very, very distressing. And then this book published this year, The Tell. It's about billionaire venture capitalist Amy Griffin, who went to underground MDMA therapy, and then she recovered memories of being repeatedly abused by her school teachers 30 years earlier. So things she had never remembered before, that's how she reports it, but that happened many, many times to her. And this got a lot of popularity in the US. This was like an Oprah's book club book, and very, very popular. And it sort of reignited this discussion whether psychedelics or MDMA could increase potential false memories, because there are some inconsistencies in that story, and it's a bit unclear whether things actually happened the way she describes it. But also more widely, I think this kind of opening up again this whole discussion about if people recover memories, are they true or not. We also saw that actually 26% of people in our study reported memories that they had never recalled before. That is a very high percentage, I thought. But then this question could be understood in multiple different ways. So I'm not sure they were recovered memories necessarily. Interestingly, for false memories, more than 10% also report memories of past lives, which we might be pretty skeptical about. And I think 2 people had memories of their birth. So I don't think it's as huge a phenomenon as Stanislav Grof would think, but sometimes it happens, it looks like. Okay, so this is a complex phenomenon. I can't go into details, but this is an emerging question, potential cause for concern, people recovering traumatic memories, and what does that mean? What I would like to say, from outside psychedelics, we know that when this happens, when people have a memory, recover a memory, and they feel like they never remembered it before, or they didn't even know that happened, that memory can be real. We know cases of that. It can be false. We have cases like that, verified cases, or it can be something between, like it can be partially accurate. And this also holds for memories recovered under psychedelics. I'm sorry, but there's no benevolent plant spirit or sort of inherent intelligence there which guarantees that whatever you experience is real. It's not like that. It could just as well be false. And please, my sort of main message that I've been giving several talks is, let's not start doing any kind of psychedelic-assisted recovered memory therapy. Like there used to be the therapists doing this recovered memory therapy, so like actively encouraging people to try and go and recover their traumas. And yeah, they come up with stuff, but a lot of the stuff is not true. And I imagine, I suspect that this could happen even more strongly when combined with psychedelics. So we should not be doing that. Okay. 2 questions I will not be touching upon here too much that we asked was, how do autobiographical memories change if they're recalled and reconsolidated under the effects of psychedelics? So whenever we retrieve a memory and we think about it, it changes. And if that happens under psychedelics, it could change in some pretty interesting and surprising ways. Maybe we start believing in it more, maybe it becomes more vivid, we don't know. Somebody should study that. The fifth question is, what are memories of psychedelic experiences like as memories? People haven't really studied that either. And I think the way we remember the experience would probably mean a lot for how we evaluate it, how meaningful it is, and what it how it affects us in the long term. But finally, so in the early papers, there was also this idea that these autobiographical experiences and psychedelics are very, very important for therapeutic effects. Here, I'll just say a couple of basic observations from our study. We did not find that time spent recalling memories or any particular type of memory experience was associated with long-term changes in well-being or psychological distress. But I should say that there was not that much change in well-being anyway. These were just a sample of people taking psychedelics in very different environments. But we did find that when people spent more time recalling memories, that was associated with more emotional breakthroughs, more psychological insights, and rating the experience as more meaningful a month later as well, not just immediately. And specifically found that those people who recalled some potentially traumatic events reported more emotional breakthroughs. Interestingly, those who reported totally new memories, so memories they had never remembered before, they also reported more emotional breakthroughs, psychological insights, and more ego dissolution as well. The last thing maybe makes me think maybe they just had really, really weird experiences that they somehow interpreted as memories, and the link with ego dissolution is kind of difficult to otherwise explain. And those recalling avoided memories, here we saw the biggest differences. So people who recorded avoided memories, much more emotional breakthroughs, more psychological insights, and rated their experiences more useful and meaningful. Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that people report quite a variety of fascinating memory experiences under psychedelics. And we have some, little bit of evidence maybe to think that experiences like this could be linked with therapeutic processes and outcomes. So we should take experiences like these much more seriously in future research and potential clinical work. We shouldn't only be focusing on, whether people have a mystical spiritual experience. In some cases, that may be very meaningful and maybe even the key. But I think in others, like dealing with your past and your personal experiences might be much more relevant. And maybe if we want to develop different forms of therapy, maybe we could intentionally provoke memory-like experiences. Talk a little bit about this with Morten in writing this paper. What would we suggest? Would we suggest bringing in photographs of your family, or your old diaries or something, if you want to think about your past and deal with it or something like that. But no recovered memory therapy, please. So let's not go in with the idea that some people in some psychedelic circles seem to have, that as long as I have enough psychedelic experiences or ceremony after ceremony after ceremony, then finally I will uncover that forgotten trauma that has to be there, that explains my distress and my sadness. And they keep doing it over and over again until something comes up. But then, what do they do with that memory, and is it real or not? We just don't know. So let's not go down that route. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for speaking on this topic. It's actually something that me and some of my colleagues has been thinking about as well in the process of developing a new measure for self-referential processing in the context of altered states. And something that has been bugging me and that I also noticed here is that there seems to be a distinction, or I would be interested if you think there is a distinction between just the time or frequency of recalling memories versus actually the access to it. Because you do mention that some people say at periods, at least, they seem to not have any access at all, while other people just seem to maybe have access, but their attention or the experience is just going elsewhere. Right, and I think Milier also wrote on this already in 2019. So yeah, I'm still wondering what to do with that in terms of researching this and measuring this properly. Whether we should try to, because you're saying we shouldn't prompt people or make them recall memories, but then that seems to be at least one way to check. Do they have access in this moment, like just in theory? Yeah. So yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah. interesting questions. I think in a laboratory with healthy participants, sure, we can ask them to try and remember this and try and remember that. That's fine. That's different from prepping them and trying to together with a therapist trying to get into and sort of the most problematic part about the recovered memory therapy is that you have this common belief that there must be something there, and as long as we try hard enough, we will uncover it. It's that sort of idea, and believing that that's the key to healing and so on. So I think we certainly can, in different ways, try and study the laboratory, try and make people remember things, and even like try and see how far back into their past they can go. If they recall childhood memories and birth memories and all that. Sure, that's interesting. But what do we do with that? The other part is like what part of the experience, right? Often, and in most of these studies, we have 2 hours into the experience, we will have this task. But as you know, people might be in very different places 2 hours into that experience. Some people might be having some sort of transcendent experience where they don't remember who they are, and somebody might be intensely concentrating on their hand, or like somebody might be thinking about their past intensely. So I think, flexible approaches, maybe we could ask people, beforehand, try and agree on how to navigate that and try and find like when they're at their most focused or something like that, and then try this, or just do it multiple times at different times during the experience. But we have some studies running now at Maastricht where people, human trials with psilocybin, where we have different memory tasks being given in the acute state with different doses. So I think we'll have some pretty interesting data out of that, just out of like cueing people with words and seeing what kind of memories they come up, how quickly and how sort of detailed and what kind of memories. I think we get quite a lot of data, just fairly basic tasks. It just hasn't been done, so I think we should be doing it. Yeah.
So the memories can be true, they can be false, and they can be something in between. They can be partially true and partially false. Do you have any ideas about what these in-between memories might be?
Yeah. So one example, of in between is that fairly frequent one will be, you can remember an event of your past, and maybe later on you find out that it did happen, but you can remember the central person in that memory wrong. You can just, and if this is a memory of abuse, for example, that makes quite a huge difference. If you recall the fact that you were abused, but the person that comes to mind, or you've suspected most or something, that might be the one you remember when actually somebody else did it. Cases like this have been uncovered where it was shown later on that it wasn't actually the father, it was somebody else. It was an uncle or something. As a sort of very dramatic example. Another example is that people can remember a true event in very detailed and very strongly personal manner, and that event did happen, but not to them, right? Maybe many have experiences of very sort of simple things. Where somebody told you something and then later you thought that happened to you, but actually it didn't. I've had an experience like that. And the studies of siblings where both sisters or brothers are convinced that an event happened to them. They remember it in detail, what happened to them. There's cases of twins, for example. Both twins remember that they had broken their leg when they were small and gone to a hospital for a week. And they both thought it happened to them. They were convinced. And then later on during the study, when they were confronted and they started arguing, but no, it was me who was there and you visited me. No, I was there and you visited me. So very drastic, sort of like inaccurate details can occur, especially, of course, twins have a very special kind of close relationship that might explain it. But, in an altered state of consciousness, very suggestive thing. Maybe it's something you read about something happening to somebody and you kind of remember it. And then there's what I think the word is cryptomnesia, or what is the word when you don't remember the source of something, but you remember the fact of it. So then, in an altered state where thoughts can feel like emotions, thoughts can feel like memories, they can become a bit, jumbled together. Then you might remember the story, but you remember it as a memory happening to yourself. So those are sort of in-between cases.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I'm a little bit confused. Like, I'm not familiar with the literature on the subject at all. So it's a little strange for me to hear the word remember and memory used in a way the colloquial sense implies that it happened. And so the notion that you have false memory seems almost contradictory. So is there some technical distinction that's used in the literature to clarify this? And also, is that definition furnished to the people you ask questions about recovered memories? And sorry, could I ask just another thing? In the cases where there are the false memories, it reminds me of the so-called satanic panic.
Yes.
Yes. So is there any conditions or any qualities that have been found to be an overlap in the psychedelic false memories and these children who had false memories of abuse in those cases?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll start with the latter question. Yes, and one of the interesting connections is Oprah Winfrey. So this book, The Tell, that details like how Amy Griffin remembered abuse under MDMA, was heavily promoted by Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey also promoted the book Michelle Remembers, which started the satanic panic. This was a memory about how a patient remembers, graphic sexual abuse, ritual abuse, and satanic elements, in a therapeutic relationship, and later was totally discredited. This was not true at all. There were false memories and so on. And she also promoted this book. So I'm a little bit worried that, more generally, I'm worried that history is repeating itself. So there was this phenomenon where therapists use suggestive methods, especially with children, and they started remembering these lurid, very detailed and complex memories of ritual sexual abuse and, like satanic things. But, these never happened, but it became a huge panic, lasted for decades, and some would argue actually led to like QAnon and Pizzagate all the way to today. So this has been a huge one. Okay, but just briefly on the other point, when I say memories, I mean things that people think are memories, or that feel like memories to those people, right? And so you could say memory-like experience or something like that. The recovered memories, the term is usually used in a sort of from a neutral position. So it's just a phenomenon that somebody thinks they've remembered or recalled something that they never recalled before, and then there's very different opinions by different people what that phenomenon really is and how often is it false and how often is it true, and if it is true, were the memories previously repressed, or did this person truly not remember them, or were they maybe just avoiding the memory, which is a very different thing? Was it a normal process of forgetting, or was it this specific psychological process of repression? So there's very complex questions, of course, related to that.
Yeah, thank you. I started to wonder in terms of narrative therapy, where the aim is to find new readings or some more meaningful readings to past events or life stories. And I always wondered psychedelics might be an enhancing thing, kind of providing more flexibility to that sort of interpretive process. But then the whole point of those memories actually being restructured or changed in that process. Do you see that more of a liability of using psychedelics, or it being this kind of engine of flexibility that can help in the interpretation process?
Yeah, that is a fascinating area and a sort of touchy subject for sure. Even without psychedelics, when we do trauma treatments and other treatments, we might use methods where we go back to a memory and we, like you said, re-script it or try and make a sort of better, sort of more safe version of that memory, right? We can do these sort of things. And even there, without any psychedelics, there's kind of this question of are we altering these people's memories? Could we be inducing a false memory? And if be careful about that, they know what they're doing and sort of they don't, they know what's happening and what really happened and how they're reinterpreting it. Now, in the psychedelics, I think they could really enhance that process, going back and reinterpreting or even sort of rewriting memories in some sense, at least. There's these methods where you go back when you were a child to a terrible thing, and then you can come in as an adult and hold your own hand or something like that and have it re-scripted like that. If you did this under psychedelics, maybe it could be more effective and more emotional, more intense. But could it also be a liability? Could it go too far? Maybe. Both. I mean, I think psychedelics more generally, they have potential to heal trauma, but also cause trauma. It's this whole intensely plastic state and all this potential. It's it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
And the final question.
Okay.
So, I mean, the people in the question in the study you were investigating, they were all for naturalistic users. Probably didn't have a therapeutic mind, therapeutic goal in mind. But now I'm thinking when we tie that to the previous talk with the MDMA, and especially in a trauma setting, it would almost surprise me if a lot that goes on there is not memory focused or autobiographical memory focused. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, we don't really know. Some of these participants did have therapeutic intentions. A few of them might have been in some sort of therapy context, but most of them were not. That's right. Yeah, what happens in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy? The manual, for example, for the way it's standardly done, it really doesn't deal with this question at all. It sort of leaves it up in the air. But I suspect, and what I've seen clips from the sessions and so on, yeah, people are a lot of the time they are dealing with past memories and past events and so on. So I think that's a big part of what happens, and not adequately explored even in like qualitatively or among those patients and so on. It's kind of been. Yeah, I think it's been forgotten, and there should be a lot more focus on that. I would imagine, yeah, especially on MDMA, like on psilocybin, you might be thinking about the memories, but you're not really describing them out or having discussions with the therapist or sort of like dealing with them, processing with them. But under MDMA, I think that would be a huge part, and I think it's a huge part of the potential of MDMA for PTSD and also for couples therapy, and anxiety of other sorts, that you can actually verbalize difficult past experiences and talk about them and reinterpret them. I think that's a huge part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samuli.